Hi everybody, my name is Mattia Chiappa. I hope you're all doing well. I promised a few of you I will start a series of walkthroughs to go along with the music I publish here. So today I'll try to break down my piece Closure, which I recently wrote as a demo for the new Spitfire library BBC Symphony Orchestra. Before we dive into my composition and orchestration process, let's have a quick listen to the music. Okay, so I wrote the piece before getting my hands on the library, and since I didn't really know how it would sound, I didn't want to risk writing something I wasn't sure I would eventually be able to do. So I ended up writing a slow, lush kind of piece which would make large use of long articulations and legatos for lyrical lines. This happens also to be my favorite kind of writing, and I just wanted to have a bit of fun with this new library. My workflow is really quite simple. I always start from piano and basically never allow myself to touch any other sound until I'm done sketching the full piece. Of course, while I'm composing, I'm already thinking about the orchestration, but that's not really the point. At this stage, I'm only focusing on the composition and trying to make it stand on its own without any other sound to support it or distract me from what the composition really is. Once I'm done sketching, I then move to either Sibelius or Logic, Sibelius in this case, and proceed with the orchestration. But even in this phase, I always go back and forth to my original piano sketch to let it guide the orchestration, and you'll see what I mean in a few moments. So this is what I originally played on piano for the first few bars. The way I played this already tells me quite a lot of how this is going to be orchestrated. For example, I was playing rather softly, and that's certainly going to reflect in the score. I was playing big chords here on the bottom, and I was playing the melody on this register, and I'm not gonna change that for sure. So all these elements are giving me hints on how to orchestrate this, and I went with violins, taking the melody up there, and strings, body strings down here in the bottom, together with bassoons and clarinets to add some warmth to the sound. I'm gonna show you how the woodwinds sound together with the low strings. As you can see, I'm also taking my voicings directly from my piano sketch. This is what I played, and this is what I eventually ended up having in the orchestration. For the biggest part, what I played is staying there. All these tiny little embellishments you see on the screen are just there in order to create some interest, but there's not much else to it. Using the same approach from bar 7, I started to develop further the orchestration by slowly bringing in the brass and the rest of the woods. The reason is I wanted to have an orchestral build in both dynamics and color. Also, I had the melody being played in octaves by strings at this point, and I needed to counterbalance that with more power in the accompaniment. So we have now the brass switching roles with the low woodwinds, which move up in the register, brightening up the overall sound. We also have flutes playing some upward runs, and oboes and French horns doubling the melody. So here's the woodwinds and the brass playing together from bar 7. When we compare this section to the previous few bars, we can see how this orchestration helps creating some interest and developing the piece further, even when the harmony is pretty much staying in the same place. So here's the build with all the instruments playing together. The next section could be considered transitioning material for what's coming after, and I'm gonna show you what I originally played on piano for this part. You might have noticed I also took the opportunity to restate the first few bars of the piece. Here's what we had at the very beginning. The purpose for this is trying to establish some sort of anchor, which I will then reuse later in the piece as part of the harmonic language I'm trying to establish. In order to have a change in orchestration, I moved the focus away from the strings, which have been very predominant so far, and moved it to the brass and the woodwinds. So here's what we have. Moving on to the next section, for contrast, I've tried to explore a less committed harmony by mostly using suspended chords and major 7 chords in different inversions. What motivated most of these choices was simple step or half step motion. Let me demonstrate that for you. Orchestrating this part was quite simple because I already had a very specific orchestration in mind. The melody is in the perfect spot for flute and later oboe. And regarding the accompaniment, I wanted to have a pulsating element on top of some pad-like chords, for which I've used strings. For the rhythm, I've used French horns layered together with vibraphone and harp. The core voicings I've used are exactly the same as the ones you've seen me play. For the second half of this section, the rhythm is being carried by clarinets and bassoons, but I also wanted to have a subtle sense of movement, so I decided to use a common orchestration technique which I've seen in many Joe Williams scores, by which he lets the strings arpeggiate a chord between two different instruments glued together by harp and oftentimes brass, which I didn't use in this case. This particular orchestration is very hard to replicate virtually, but when you layer those two instruments with some long articulation, it can actually add a very subtle effect, which can work very well sometimes. For the next section, I reinstated the main theme, but I'm now using a different harmonic progression in order to make it a little bit more interesting. I'm also using a different orchestration, where the cello is now taking the melody. Whenever I get a chance, I try to refresh the orchestration and keep the colors moving and clearing space for what's to come next. We start with the focus on the cellos, as we said before. Down here. It then moves to violins, brass, drop out, making space for the strings again, woodwinds, all together. At 34, I wanted to give the illusion that we reached the climax of the piece, but I'm in fact still saving colors for a second unexpected build. At this point, we have strings in 4 octaves playing the melody together, and brass playing big open chords, and woodwinds together with harp and celeste playing some arpeggios. This is also a very common orchestration technique that you can find in many Disney scores. Here's what the woods and percussion sound like in isolation. Let's also have a quick listen to brass and strings together. In the next few bars, I'm just setting up the build for the big climax that we discussed before, where the theme is going to feel bigger because I will put more emphasis on the melody and harmonies rather than the textures lying underneath. As you can see, the new statement of the melody is now very powerful, as we now have violins, flutes, clarinets, oboes and French horns playing the melody together or in harmony. For this section, I also wanted to retain some of the excitement and movement that we had in the previous few bars, so it was the perfect opportunity for me to reuse the interlocking arpeggios technique that we had earlier in the piece. All these different elements together make a very full sound, which is appropriate for this section, as this is going to be the last recapitulation of the main theme. And finally, this piece ends building tension with some rather tasty dissonances and clusters played by woodwinds and strings, which eventually resolve on a last major 9 chord. Let's take a look on those woodwinds and focus on those clusters we were talking about before. The function of the strings is creating a paddy background holding the harmony together, but also creating more clashes with the woodwinds. That's it. I realize we haven't talked much about percussions, but maybe we can dive into that a little bit more the next time. In a few words, the way I tend to use them is just like anybody else, really, mostly for accents and dynamic lifts. If you made it to the end, thank you. I really hope this was at least a little bit entertaining to watch, and that maybe you'll be able to take something out of it. I really do apologize for my sloppy, weird editing and delivery. I really hope I will get better at this over time. But in the meantime, if you have any suggestions or you want me to talk more in detail about something else in the future, please do leave a comment below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more of this to come. Thank you again for watching and see you soon. Bye!